Ida, because I won't delay having a hysterectomy after the birth of my baby so I can be a surrogate for my sister. The story of my life's journey, which now brought me to the precipice of an irreversible decision, began long before I ever envisioned standing here. The battle with my own body had started in my earliest years, when I was barely old enough to comprehend what it meant to have a body that betrayed you. I was 9 years old when I experienced my first period, far too young to carry such a burden. It wasn't just the ordinary transition into adolescence that others spoke of with nervous giggles and knowing glances. No, my experience was one of pain that stole my breath, of fatigue that settled deep into my bones, and of fear that something was fundamentally wrong within me. Month after month, my cycles would come with an intensity that made it impossible to function as a normal child. The bleeding was heavy, relentless, and accompanied by cramps that felt like sharp knives twisting inside me. Doctors would wave it off, offering shallow reassurances that it was part of growing up, but I knew there was something more sinister beneath the surface. As I grew older, my periods became a cycle of torment that left me exhausted, emotionally drained, and disconnected from the life I wanted to live. I lost countless days of my adolescence to lying curled up in bed, clutching my stomach, praying for the pain to end. By the time I was in my teens, I learned to dread each calendar month, knowing it would bring another wave of agony that no over-the-counter medication could touch. I would push through school, activities, and social obligations with a strained smile, pretending that I wasn't fighting an invisible war inside myself. But the truth was, I was tired. So incredibly tired. It didn't take long for me to realize that my condition wasn't just a nuisance, it was a thief, stealing away my youth, my joy, and my hope. In my 20s, the symptoms worsened. It wasn't just the heavy bleeding or the endless cramps anymore. I experienced dizzy spells, headaches, nausea, and mood swings that left me feeling like I was trapped in a body I didn't recognize. I sought medical help again, desperate for answers, only to be met with more dismissals or vague suggestions to consider hormone treatments that never seemed to offer the relief I needed. The diagnosis came slowly, like an unraveling thread, leading to the realization that I had significant reproductive health issues. I was told that a hysterectomy could relieve the symptoms that had plagued me for years, offering a chance at a life not defined by pain. But I hesitated. There was one dream I clung to. One reason I held out hope despite my body's rebellion. I wanted to become a mother. I had always wanted children of my own, and despite the odds stacked against me, I wasn't ready to give up on that dream. I knew that a hysterectomy would be the end of that possibility forever. So, I pushed through. I delayed the surgery despite my doctor's recommendations, holding on to the hope that I might, against all odds, conceive. Miraculously, I did. The first time I saw the positive pregnancy test, I was overwhelmed with a mixture of disbelief and joy so profound that it brought tears to my eyes. I had fought so hard to reach this moment, to defy what felt like an inevitability, and here I was, carrying life within me. The pregnancies weren't easy by any means. Each one took a toll on my body that left me more battered and exhausted than the last. Yet, the joy of holding my children in my arms made every moment of suffering worth it. I had created life, built a family with my husband, and found a purpose that made all the years of torment feel less like a curse and more like a test of resilience. Now, as I approached the birth of my third child, I knew this chapter of my life had to come to an end. My body couldn't endure more. The pain had worsened over time, and each pregnancy left lingering scars that wouldn't heal. I was constantly fatigued, aching in ways I couldn't describe, and losing pieces of myself to this endless battle with my own body. I knew that once this child was born, I would finally undergo the hysterectomy that had been hanging over my head for years. The decision wasn't made lightly. It came with the weight of years of suffering, of longing for normalcy, and of choosing my own survival. But there was a shadow cast over this choice, the knowledge of my sister's struggle. My sister, 3 years older than me, had been dealt a different kind of cruel hand by fate. While I battled the pain of my reproductive system's rebellion, she faced the heartbreak of infertility. She and her husband had tried everything they could think of to conceive, but nothing had worked. Fertility treatments, specialists, endless tests, all of it had led them to the same devastating conclusion: their chances of having a child of their own were slim to none. The sorrow that radiated from her was palpable. I could see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice, and feel it in the way she clung to hope even when the odds were against her. The suggestion of surrogacy had come up more than once, though my sister had been resistant to the idea. She longed to experience pregnancy herself, to feel her child growing inside her, and to bond in a way that only a biological mother could. It wasn't just about having a baby, it was about the deeply personal, irreplaceable experience of carrying life within her. Yet, as time went on and her options dwindled, the idea of surrogacy began to weigh heavier on her mind. She never explicitly asked me to be her surrogate, though I knew the thought had crossed her mind more than once. The truth was, if my circumstances were different, I would have done it for her in a heartbeat. We were close, always had been. She was more than my sister. She was my confidant, my friend, the person I turned to in both joy and sorrow. There was nothing I wouldn't do for her except this. My body was too broken, too worn down, and too fragile to endure another pregnancy. I had pushed myself to the brink to bring my own children into the world, and I knew that if I delayed the hysterectomy any longer, I might never recover from the damage it had already done. The guilt weighed heavily on me. I knew what my sister wanted, and I knew that my refusal would hurt her. But I couldn't put my life on hold any longer. I couldn't sacrifice my own health and well-being to give her what she longed for, no matter how much it pained me to see her suffer. It wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't one I made lightly. But it was a choice I had to make for myself, for my husband, for my children who needed a healthy mother. My body had given everything it could, and it was time to put my own survival first. When my sister finally asked me outright to be her surrogate, I knew the conversation would come eventually. It was December, just weeks before my scheduled C-section and hysterectomy. Her words were hesitant, laced with a vulnerability that broke my heart. She explained her desperation, her longing to be a mother, and how much it would mean to her if I could carry a child for her. I listened, my heart aching for her pain, but I knew what I had to say. I told her the truth, that I loved her, that I wished I could do this for her, but my body couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't delay the surgery. I couldn't endure another pregnancy. The sorrow in her eyes was unbearable, and though she told me she understood, I could see the disappointment etched into her expression. It wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. She had hoped, against all odds, that I would be the one to give her the gift she longed for. And I had to tell her no. What followed was a delicate dance of grief and reconciliation. My sister tried to move past it, but the pain lingered. Then came Christmas, and with it, the confrontation that would shatter the fragile peace we had managed to maintain. My brother-in-law, furious on my sister's behalf, cornered me during the festivities and unleashed his anger. He called me selfish, accused me of putting my own desires above my sister's dreams, and laid the blame for her heartbreak squarely at my feet. It was an attack I hadn't anticipated, and it left me reeling. My husband and mother stepped in, defending me against the accusations, but the damage was done. The weight of my brother-in-law's words hung heavily over the rest of the day, turning what should have been a joyful celebration into a strained, uncomfortable gathering. Afterward, my sister apologized for her husband's outburst, but the hurt lingered. The bond we had shared felt fractured, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed her in some irrevocable way. I carried that guilt with me, questioning my choices, wondering if I could have done more. But deep down, I knew the truth. My body had given all it could, and it was time to reclaim my health. It was time to survive. In December, as the days ticked closer to my scheduled C-section and the hysterectomy that would follow, my sister finally voiced what I had sensed lingering in her heart for months, maybe even years. She came to me in a quiet moment, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of hope that she couldn't quite suppress. There was something heartbreaking about the way she asked, not in anger, not with entitlement, but with a raw vulnerability that made my chest tighten. She asked me to wait, to hold off on the surgery that would end my ability to carry children. She asked me to give her the gift she couldn't achieve on her own, a child, one that would carry her blood and her husband's, one that would fulfill her deepest, most desperate wish to be a mother. I listened in silence, my heart aching as her words filled the space between us. There was no easy way to respond to such a request. It wasn't like asking for a favor or borrowing something temporarily. She wasn't asking for something I could take back or undo once it was done. She was asking me to put my body through another pregnancy, to endure the physical toll it would take on me, to delay a surgery that was more than just a medical procedure. It was my lifeline, the end to years of suffering. She was asking for something monumental, something that would change both our lives forever. When she finished, there was a long pause, the weight of her request hanging heavily in the air. I could see the anticipation in her eyes, the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I would say yes. That I would push aside my own pain and exhaustion, my own battle for survival, and do this one thing for her. And I hated that I had to crush that hope. "I'm so sorry," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "I wish things were different. If my body wasn't giving me the hell it is, I would do it for you. You know I would. But I can't delay the surgery any longer. I can't." I watched as her expression shifted, the hope in her eyes dimming, replaced by disappointment that she tried and failed to hide. She nodded slowly, her lips pressed together in a thin line, as if holding back the emotions that threatened to spill over. "It's fine," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I understand. Really, I do. You've been through so much already. I'll get over it." But even as she spoke those words, I could see the hurt in her eyes. She wasn't angry, not yet. She wasn't going to lash out or accuse me of being selfish. But she was devastated, and I could feel the fracture in our bond widening, a crack that neither of us knew how to repair. I wanted to reach out to her, to pull her into a hug and promise her that everything would be okay, that she would find a way to be a mother, even if it wasn't through me. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Not right now. In the days that followed, the tension lingered between us like an unspoken ghost. We continued with our usual interactions, but there was a distance now, a space that hadn't been there before. Every time I saw her, I wondered if she was thinking about what she had asked me, if she was replaying our conversation in her mind, dissecting my refusal and questioning my reasons. And I hated that. I hated feeling like I had let her down, like I had failed her in some irrevocable way. But what choice did I have? I couldn't keep sacrificing my health, my sanity, for everyone else's happiness. I tried to push those thoughts aside as Christmas approached, focusing on my own family and the upcoming birth of my third child. My husband was my rock through it all, reminding me that I had done more than enough, that it wasn't my responsibility to fix everyone else's problems at the expense of my own well-being. But the guilt was hard to shake. It sat in my chest like a heavy stone, a constant reminder that my sister was still struggling, still hurting, and there was nothing I could do to take that pain away. When Christmas Day arrived, I was determined to make it a joyful occasion, despite the tension that lingered beneath the surface. Our entire family gathered at my parents' house, the air filled with the scent of roasting meat and the sound of laughter and chatter. For a few hours, it almost felt normal. We exchanged gifts, shared stories, and enjoyed each other's company. But I couldn't ignore the way my sister avoided my gaze or the way her husband, my brother-in-law, seemed to watch me with a quiet intensity that made me uneasy. It was after lunch, when everyone was milling about, distracted by the festivities, that my brother-in-law approached me. His tone was deceptively calm, but there was a sharpness to his words that cut through the holiday cheer like a blade. "Can we talk?" he asked, gesturing for me to follow him into the kitchen. Reluctantly, I agreed, sensing that this conversation wouldn't end well. The moment we were alone, his demeanor shifted. The calm facade cracked, revealing the simmering anger beneath. "I just need to understand something," he began, his voice low and controlled. "You say you love your sister. You've always said you'd do anything for her. But when it comes down to it, when she needs you the most, you won't help her. You're willing to let her suffer, to watch her go through this heartbreak, just so you can have your surgery a little sooner." I was stunned by the harshness of his words, the accusation laid bare without any attempt to soften the blow. "It's not that simple," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. "You have no idea what I've been through. What my body has been through." He shook his head, dismissing my explanation. "I know it's been hard for you. I'm not saying it hasn't. But you've had 3 kids. You've gotten what you wanted. And now you're turning your back on the one person who would give anything to have what you have. How is that fair?" "It's not about fairness," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "It's about survival. I can't keep putting myself through this. I'm not doing this to hurt her. I'm doing it because I need to live. I need to be here for my own children." He scoffed, his expression filled with disdain. "You're being selfish. Plain and simple. You're putting your own comfort above your sister's happiness. If you really loved her, you'd find a way to help her. Just like you found a way to have your own kids." Before I could respond, my husband entered the kitchen, followed closely by my mom. They had heard enough of the conversation to know what was happening, and they weren't about to let my brother-in-law continue his attack unchecked. "That's enough," my husband said, stepping between us. His voice was firm, steady, the protective edge unmistakable. "Nobody has the right to pressure someone into carrying a pregnancy. Not you. Not anyone." My mom nodded in agreement, her expression fierce. "Emotions are running high, but this isn't her fault. She's been through hell, and she's made her decision. You don't get to guilt her into changing her mind." But my brother-in-law wasn't ready to back down. "She broke her sister's heart. Do you understand that? She's robbed her of the chance to have a baby that's biologically hers." My mom's voice softened, though the conviction remained. "And you think attacking her will fix that? You think making her feel worse will somehow heal your wife's pain? We're all hurting. But blaming her isn't going to help." The confrontation left me shaken, the weight of his words pressing down on me long after the conversation ended. The rest of the day was tense, the festive atmosphere soured by the lingering tension. My sister avoided me even more, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something precious, not just the bond we shared, but a piece of myself that I couldn't get back. In the days that followed, my sister reached out to apologize for her husband's behavior. "He's just so upset," she said, her voice quiet and filled with regret. "We both are. We feel robbed. I'm sorry. I'm sorry too," I told her. And I was. More than I could ever put into words. But the damage had been done. The fracture in our relationship remained, a silent reminder of the impossible choices we had both been forced to make. The confrontation with my brother-in-law on Christmas Day was a scene that I would replay in my mind over and over again, each time feeling the sting of his words and the weight of his accusations. It began when the festive atmosphere seemed to lull everyone into a sense of ease, as though we could all set aside the lingering tension for the sake of the holiday. The tree was adorned with twinkling lights, and laughter filled the air as wrapping paper crinkled and children's delighted squeals echoed through the house. For a moment, I let myself believe that we could have a normal Christmas, that the unspoken conflict hanging over me and my sister would remain buried, at least for the day. But that illusion shattered when my brother-in-law, with a carefully neutral expression masking his true intent, approached me. His voice was calm at first, almost disarmingly so, as he asked if we could speak privately. I followed him into a quieter corner of the house, my mind racing with possibilities of what he might want to say. Perhaps an apology, I thought. Perhaps he would extend an olive branch, acknowledging that things had gotten out of hand and emotions had run high. I couldn't have been more wrong. The moment we were out of earshot from the others, his demeanor shifted. The calm facade fell away, revealing the simmering anger that he had been holding back. His eyes, usually warm and kind in family gatherings, were now hard and accusing. His words came quickly, each one striking me like a blow. "You've always said you love your sister," he began, his voice low but filled with venom. "You've always claimed you'd do anything for her. But when it comes down to it, when she needs you more than ever, you won't do the one thing that could make her dream come true. You won't help her have a baby." I was stunned into silence, my breath catching in my throat as I tried to process what he was saying. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, but he didn't give me the chance. "You delayed your surgery before," he continued, his tone growing harsher with each word. "You chose to endure the pain so you could have kids of your own. You made that sacrifice for yourself, for your own family. And now you're saying you can't do the same for her? How is that fair? How can you call yourself a good sister when you are willing to let her suffer like this?" The guilt that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks surged to the forefront, threatening to drown me in its weight. But along with the guilt came anger. Anger that he had the audacity to reduce my pain and suffering to a selfish choice. Anger that he was attacking me during a family gathering, on Christmas Day, no less, when we were supposed to be celebrating together. An anger that he couldn't see the toll this was taking on me, too. "I'm not delaying my surgery for myself," I finally managed to say, my voice trembling but resolute. "I'm doing it because I have to. Because I can't survive like this any longer. You have no idea what it's like to live in constant pain, to feel like your body is falling apart from the inside out. I'm not making this decision lightly. I've thought about it endlessly, and it breaks my heart that I can't help her. But I have to put my health first." He scoffed, shaking his head as though my words were nothing more than excuses. "You could help her," he said. "You're just choosing not to. You're choosing your own comfort over your sister's happiness. That's the truth, whether you want to admit it or not." Before I could respond, I heard footsteps approaching. My husband and my mom had heard enough of the conversation to know what was happening, and they weren't about to let my brother-in-law continue his attack unchecked. "That's enough," my husband said, stepping between us, his voice firm and commanding. "You don't get to speak to her like that. Nobody should ever be pressured into carrying a pregnancy. Not for you, not for anyone." There was a protective fierceness in his tone that sent a wave of relief through me. He wasn't going to let me stand alone in this. He wasn't going to let my brother-in-law bully me into feeling like I was the villain in this story. My mom stood beside him, her expression equally stern. "Emotions might be high around this," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "But none of this is her fault. She's done everything she can to be there for her sister. Attacking her isn't going to help anyone. You need to back off." But my brother-in-law wasn't ready to back down. His anger burned too brightly, his sense of injustice too deeply rooted. "She's broken her sister's heart," he snapped. "She's robbed her of the chance to have a child that's biologically hers. How can you stand there and defend that?" My mom's gaze softened, though her conviction remained strong. "She hasn't robbed anyone of anything. Life has been cruel to both of them in different ways. But blaming her for things beyond her control isn't fair. You need to understand that." The rest of the day was tense, the festive spirit overshadowed by the confrontation. My brother-in-law kept his distance for the remainder of the gathering, his disapproval radiating from him like a dark cloud. My sister, too, seemed more withdrawn, avoiding prolonged eye contact with me, as though unsure how to navigate the fragile truce between us. After Christmas, my sister reached out to me. Her voice was soft and filled with regret. "I'm sorry about what happened," she said. "He was out of line. We've been so upset. It's hard not to feel like we've been robbed. It's hard to accept that we might never have a child that's ours. I know, I said, my heart aching for her. I'm so sorry. I wish things were different. I really do. But the apology did little to ease the tension. The fracture in our relationship remained, a silent reminder of the impossible choices we had both been forced to make. Days later, my brother-in-law sent a message, his words no less harsh despite the distance of written text. I know she apologized, but I still think you are incredibly selfish, he wrote. You could have done this for her. You just didn't want to. I stared at the message for a long time, the words blurring as tears welled in my eyes. I had expected that the rift between us wouldn't heal overnight, but seeing his anger laid out so plainly still hurt more than I cared to admit. I didn't respond. What could I say that hadn't already been said? What justification could I offer that wouldn't sound like an excuse in his eyes? He had made up his mind about me, and no amount of explanation would change that. In the weeks that followed, I tried to focus on my own family, preparing for the arrival of my third child and the surgery that would bring an end to years of suffering. But the guilt lingered, a constant presence in the back of my mind. I knew I had made the right decision for my own health and well-being, but it didn't make the pain of my sister's disappointment any easier to bear. The truth was, there were no winners in this situation. No matter what choice I made, someone would end up hurt. And that was a burden I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The tension that followed Christmas Day became a constant, unspoken presence between us. My sister, despite her initial apology, seemed distant, though I couldn't blame her. I knew the depth of her pain, the crushing weight of feeling like her dream of becoming a mother was slipping through her fingers. It was a grief I couldn't truly understand but could empathize with as much as possible. I had carried my own burdens, years of battling my body, of pushing through relentless pain, of holding on to hope even when the odds were against me. But her grief was different. It was a silent ache, a longing for something that might never come to be. After that strained Christmas, I tried to resume some sense of normalcy. I focused on my pregnancy, preparing for the birth of my third child, knowing it would be my last. The thought was bittersweet. I had dreamed of having a family, of raising children with my husband, and despite everything my body had put me through, I had been blessed with that reality. But the knowledge that I was closing this chapter, that my body could no longer bear the weight of another pregnancy, was a reminder of just how fragile our plans could be. My sister and I spoke occasionally, but our conversations felt careful, like we were both tiptoeing around the subject that loomed between us. I wanted to be there for her, to offer my support in any way I could, but I also knew that no amount of comfort could fill the void she felt. The fact that I was pregnant only made it harder. Every conversation, every reminder of the life growing inside me, was a reminder of what she couldn't have. I couldn't imagine how painful that must have been for her, and the guilt gnawed at me daily. A few weeks after Christmas, my brother-in-law reached out again. His message was brief, but it cut deep. I know my wife apologized to you, but I'm not going to. I still think what you did was incredibly selfish. You could have helped her. You just chose not to. I stared at the message, my chest tightening with a familiar ache. His words echoed the guilt I already felt, but seeing them spelled out like that made it worse. It wasn't just a fleeting thought in my mind, it was someone else's judgment, harsh and unrelenting. For a long time, I debated whether to respond. Part of me wanted to explain again, to make him see that this wasn't a choice I had made lightly. But I knew it wouldn't change his mind. He had already decided who I was in this story, the selfish sister who had prioritized her own comfort over her siblings' happiness. In his eyes, there was no room for nuance, no understanding of the years of pain and sacrifice I had endured. To him, it was black and white. So, I didn't respond. I put my phone down and walked away, but the weight of his words followed me. Days turned into weeks, and eventually, the day of my scheduled C-section arrived. The procedure went as planned, and soon I was holding my third child in my arms. The joy of that moment was overwhelming, but it was tinged with the bittersweet knowledge that this was the end of my journey as a mother in the biological sense. There would be no more pregnancies, no more new lives growing inside me. It was a relief, but it was also a farewell to a part of my life that had defined me for so long. In the days following the birth, I underwent the hysterectomy. The recovery was painful, both physically and emotionally, but I knew it was necessary. My body had endured enough, and it was time to reclaim my health. Yet, even in those moments of recovery, my thoughts often drifted to my sister. I wondered if she was thinking of me, if she resented me for the decision I had made, or if she understood that it wasn't a matter of selfishness but survival. It wasn't until weeks later that she reached out again. Her message was hesitant, almost shy. "Hey, how are you feeling?" I took a deep breath before responding. "I'm okay. Recovering, slowly. How are you?" There was a long pause before her reply came through. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About Christmas, about what I asked you. And I want you to know that I don't blame you. I was hurt, and I still am, but I understand why you made the decision you did. I just wish things were different." Tears welled in my eyes as I read her message. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words until that moment. "I wish things were different too," I wrote back. "I love you. I hope you know that." "I do," she replied. "And I love you too. I'm sorry for everything that happened. I know it's been hard for you too." In that moment, some of the weight I had been carrying lifted. The wound between us wasn't fully healed, but it was a start. We both understood that life had dealt us difficult hands, and while our paths had diverged, our bond as sisters remained. As the months passed, I watched from a distance as my sister continued her journey to become a mother. She explored different options, including adoption and surrogacy through an agency. It wasn't an easy process, and there were still moments of pain and longing, but I saw a quiet resilience in her that I admired deeply. She hadn't given up hope, even after all the heartbreak she had endured. My brother-in-law, however, remained distant. He never apologized, never reached out again. His words lingered in my mind from time to time, but I reminded myself that his anger came from a place of pain and frustration. It wasn't my responsibility to carry his judgment. I had made the best decision I could for myself and my family, and I couldn't let his bitterness define my sense of worth. Looking back, I knew there were no villains in this story. There were only people navigating heartbreak, loss, and difficult choices. My sister and her husband had every right to feel hurt and disappointed, just as I had every right to prioritize my own health and well-being. Life is rarely black and white, and the paths we take are often shaped by circumstances beyond our control. In the end, I held on to one truth: I had given everything I could. I had endured years of suffering to bring my own children into the world, and when my body told me it could endure no more, I listened. It wasn't selfishness, it was survival. And while my heart ached for my sister's pain, I knew that sometimes, loving someone means making choices they might not understand in the moment. It means setting boundaries, even when it hurts. So, was I the asshole? No. I wasn't. I was a woman who had been through hell and back, who had made impossible choices in the face of relentless pain. I was a mother who wanted to be there for her children, a sister who loved deeply but couldn't sacrifice her health for someone else's happiness. I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't selfish either. I was human. And sometimes, that's all we can be.